Betsy, can you hear me? I think I have poor quality.
We can hear you fine.
Oh, Hanley can hear me? Okay. So should I go ahead and kick this off, Hanley, or do you need to do anything from that end?
Just a second.
Hi, Brian. Brian, you give me the thumbs up that we're ready, okay?
Okay. Is it? Do we have Kate yet? Or not?
I don't see Kate. There's Kate.
All right. We're good to go, Candace.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I may have some audio issues, and if Councilmember Burke is on, you may have to carry on for me if you continue, or maybe Councilmember. Welcome, everyone, to the Finance and Administration Committee meeting for August 17th. And we had a week off last week, so some of us were able to get away. So I hope everyone enjoyed their time, and it heated up on us. So let's try to stay cool today. Today, for our agenda, we start out with a motion to approve the minutes from the July 20th meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Any discussion or changes? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Have a majority. Anyone against? Thank you. The first item on consent, I'm very excited to announce that the state did grant close to $25,000 for an art project for the new roundabout up on the top of 5 Mile Prairie, right where it connects the city and the county. And so this is an art project permit and license. It's on consent. If anyone needs any more information, let me know now and we can discuss. Otherwise, we'll move on to our discussion items. Great, thank you. We have one change on the agenda. Item D has been pulled. So we will start with the restoration of traffic calming funds from the Spokane Police Department. And who would like to lead this discussion? I know we have a memo from Tim Donovan, and Council President Beggs, you've been involved.
Yep, I'll take it. Yeah, so we already got some good feedback from Tanya Wallace on changing a little bit of the language so it doesn't raise a audit flag. But essentially, over the last couple of years, we've been trying to get the police department to use some traffic calming funds if they would devote a certain amount of their shifts to schools, and then we added parks. And the idea was they could add officers, but that it wouldn't be a set officer, would be on shifts. And the last resolution that we had was that any shift they documented that they spent more than 50% of their time on that shift within, I can't remember if it was 300 yards or 300 feet of schools and parks, they could bill that against the traffic calming funds that we had set aside for that. We haven't really reached that agreement. They haven't been willing to do the 50%. We came close, about 8 months ago, to getting something figured out. It'd be great if we just got something written up. But in the meantime, there was a transfer of funds, but it didn't, I think the accounting people that did it were just kind of looking at the resolution and weren't documenting whether or not the shifts were 50%. And I don't believe they were 50%. And so this kind of resets that table, puts that back, sends us back to the negotiation table to try to get it figured out. So it just, and the traffic calming fund particularly needs that since school's been out and our camera funds are not coming in except for collections of old ones. And there's a bunch of projects that have been committed to that we need the funding for. So.
Yes, Councilmember Cathcart.
Yeah, so I spoke to SPD earlier today to try and get their side of this, And they think that if this money goes away, that it's going to really harm the NRO program. And essentially that this is what is funding the NRO program. So if this goes away, they're very concerned that they're going to see a shortfall and that may be at risk.
So this money was not 2 years ago. We took the NRO out of the traffic calming funds. So this money wasn't for anything to do with NRO. It was only to do with traffic officers. So that changed a couple of years ago.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm just telling you that's their
Yeah.
perspective is that this is what's being used to fund NROs. So that might be something that needs to get figured
Yeah.
out.
Yep.
Councilmember Kinnear.
I'm curious as Mr. Cathcart, who you spoke with, because Council President and I have been meeting regularly. We're meeting regularly with Kevin King, Justin Lundgren, to get this straightened out. So,
Yeah,
who are you speaking to?
Who shared this concern?
I'm sorry, who?
Assistant Chief Lundgren.
Yeah, so we were, as Council President said, this is not part of, he's confused.
Yeah. We did have a big argument about it 2 years ago when we made that shift, but the NRO funding was only for a set period of time, and that ended, and they continued to do the NRO funding without using these traffic calming funds. So I'm not sure where that's coming from, but I get that they told you that. So.
All right. Anything else on this change or question? Thank you for everyone who's worked on it. Thank you, Tanya and team, for doing all the deep dive on the accounting on this. Thank you, Tim Donovan, for doing all the research on where we were. And I know that the police department has been working with us as well to try to get to a good agreement here. Everybody wants to improve the system, but I think this makes sense to clean this up and really get down to what do we want from this program and where should it be allocated. There's also some accounting reasons why you may not want to be funding operating out of this kind of a program for the exact reason. This program got shut down because of COVID and the funding isn't there. So we don't want to be in that situation where police are depending on funding that's not coming in. Great, thank you. Next, we have Eric Paulson with our potential extension of lobbying services. Eric.
Sorry for my delay. Thank you, Councilwoman Mom. Under your leadership and that of the Council's legislative team, the City of Spokane has had some tremendous success with our state legislative agendas, especially in terms of securing capital budget grants for city and community projects and passing laws that advance the Council's policy priorities around housing, criminal justice, transportation, and other issues. Success stems from Republican, who I think most of you know, Luke Esser, and Nick Federici, which has a... Oh, my camera's frozen, I'm here, and doing my best. I'm in the conference room, and technical difficulties. Anyway, so Nick Federici, continuing, is a highly respected housing and social services advocate. So they've been on contract with our city for about 5 years. We've re-upped their contract, I believe, 2 times previously, and this is the last time we can extend the contract before an RFP is needed. And so this measure would simply continue their work for the next 24 months. And it does reflect a salary adjustment. We did a salary survey last year and again this year, just to make sure that we are competitive with other cities and municipal entities that have state lobbying. And this recommendation puts them sort of closer to what their peers are earning in this very competitive marketplace. They're still kind of on the low scale of that amount, but it does reflect an increase. And again, this contract would run through June 30th of 2021. Available to answer any questions?
Hey, Eric, Councilmember Cathcart, I would just say thanks again for sending me some of the follow-up information about the contracts. That was helpful. And you know, regardless of whether or not there's maybe disagreements on some of the legislative agenda items, I do think that at least the taxpayers are well served by having, you know, two very effective lobbyists that can speak pretty well to varying caucuses over in Olympia. So I think it makes sense to extend this.
Any other questions? All right, great. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And my guardian angels of agenda management reminded me I skipped over item B, strategic reserve and interfund transfers ordinance changes. Tim, is that yours?
Yeah, sorry, I said unmute. Thank you, council members. This goes back to a conversation I think that really started late last year when I was actually helping Paul and Josie develop the budget for the administration, and we met with Council President Beggs, and there was a lot of conversation about a way to set up a strategic reserve account. And so for the better part of this year, that dialogue has continued on how can we set that reserve up and then establish funding for it. And one of the topics that came up as a way to fund it would be using general fund salary savings for primarily long-term vacancies was the initial thought. We could quarterly capture the savings related to those positions. And as we worked through that in conversations with Tanya Wallace and Paul and Josie, they brought up some of the pitfalls of doing something like that quarterly, especially in a year like this year where actual money coming in isn't going to match the budget. So there aren't, even though you have budgetary savings, you don't have real dollar savings. So what it morphed into is the proposal that we brought forward for Finance Committee today, which would be more of an annual look back. So that when we're looking back at the end of the year, we know that whether or not there's real dollar savings, because we're not looking so much, we look at the budget, but we're also looking at the revenue in excess of expenses in any given year. And so the first part would be a change to the municipal code that establishes the strategic reserve. The draft in front of you for that looks almost identical to how the contingency reserve was set up and how the revenue stabilization was set up, with the same kind of parameters, with the annual funding being a look back, where at the end of the year, if there's a net positive variance for the year in the general fund, we would look at how much of that was generated from salary and benefit savings. And I just put a target amount in there of 1% of the general fund. That was just a kind of a placeholder for council to discuss what the appropriate amount is. Based on the current budget, it'd be about $2 million, so that if at the end of the year there's a $5 million positive variance and $2 million of that was related to salary and benefit savings, that $2 million would automatically sweep into the strategic reserve account. And then any remaining balance would follow the current practice that's already set up in the municipal code for funding of the revenue stabilization and contingency reserve accounts. And so, and then the second piece of that is really kind of codifying what's been a past practice since, I think, back to 2001. Former city administrator Jack Lynch, if anybody remembers him, just drew a line in the sand and said, you can't take personnel savings and spend it on anything else. And that's kind of what historically we've done that for the most part. There's been a few exceptions here and there, but they're typically made by the city administrator. So this would just put that into the code that says, if you're going to take personnel savings and you want to transfer it to a non-personnel line item, that has to be done through an SBO that the council approves. And that, by doing so, like I said, it's putting in into the code, what we've kind of been doing. I know Tanya Wallace sent an email the other day asking if that could be delayed until January 1 of 2021, and I completely understand that request because this year that's how they're managing the shortfalls, taking all the salary savings and moving them into a reserve line item so they can't be spent at all. But going forward in practice, that would be the way that we ensure that the money that the council puts into the budget for salaries is preserved that way. I mean, it allows to me, it preserves budget integrity for the way the council adopted the budget. I know in the past there's been a lot of concern about council putting positions in the budget that never get filled, and that's been a concern by that was expressed to me in my prior life working for the administration. That council say, look, we put, and I'll use the example of solid waste. We put 5 solid waste positions in the budget. Nobody's filling them. Why not? So these two changes combined would set up a mechanism to create the strategic reserve and then the method for funding it through the salary savings.
Tim, I have a question. Just in looking through the document, do you believe it is clear that the 2 other reserves will be prioritized?
As far as I know, there's been some question about. I think it's clear how they're funded, and I think because that's how we try to set up this is that salary savings go to this new strategic reserve first, and then once you've met the target, like currently I put it in at 1%. So once you have roughly $2 million in there, any additional salary savings would be treated like any other savings that created a net positive variance. And I think the municipal code currently says they go to fill the revenue stabilization first. Once that's fully funded, then they go to contingency reserve. And once those are both fully funded, then they just go into the unappropriated reserves. I know there's been some question on prioritization on use of reserves. I would agree that was not very clearly spelled out on potentially how they're used when, like for this year, we have a shortfall. Nothing there. I don't think we have anything that says use rev stabilization first, use contingency second, or anything like that. So that's probably an area where that could be shored up as well.
Well, I think it depends on the purpose and why.
Agreed.
I have a little concern that we are sidestepping our original priorities, which were just that, the revenue stabilization and contingency reserve over this. So what I'm hearing you say, but maybe don't have it right, salary savings will be treated differently, and that won't be put into those first 2 pots before this. Is that what we're saying?
I think if I heard your question, you're concerned with we're taking salary savings away from the original purpose of funding reserves?
No, but we haven't defined it like this. It sounds like this is being treated separately, and it would not be third, it would be first, based on the category. It wouldn't, before it would go to the other 2 pots.
That's correct. The way this is worded, it would take salary savings and give them, for lack of a better term, preferential treatment towards strategic reserve first. And so once that's funded, any additional salary savings would just be considered the same as any other savings that created the positive variance, and they would fund revenue stabilization, and next would go, and then the contingency reserve after that. Timing-wise, I mean, we think it's going to change because there's likely going to be the use of reserves in the current year and potentially 2021 because of the economic downturn related to the pandemic. But in the way when we first started working on this, and both those 2 reserves, the revenue stabilization and the contingency reserve, are fully funded. So that does add a little bit of a wrinkle, but I think the intent was to take these salary savings kind of and set them aside for specific, at least for that 1% that's in the target right now, and then anything else would be left in the broader pool to fund revenue stabilization and contingency. So that's obviously a council decision. I was trying to come up with something that would meet the desire to create and find a funding mechanism for the strategic reserve account. So at this point, it's certainly something that can be changed. But that was the mechanism I came up with to try and meet the target.
What would it look like if it was third?
If the funding the strategic reserve was third,
Yes.
I think at that point you'd have to eliminate the. I don't know if you'd have to, but you would have to. I assume you'd have to break the tie between salary and benefit savings toward that strategic reserve. The intent when we put that together was to craft something that created a specific funding mechanism. If you put it at third, now you're just saying, well, if we have any type of positive variance, then we prioritize. Currently it says revenue stabilization and contingency reserve, and then once those are fully funded, anything left could go into strategic reserve, and that's certainly an option. But in the case as we brought it forward today, we were purposefully trying to craft something that targeted a specific savings toward the strategic reserve.
Sure. I see why one would want to do that if we were just worrying about that. I just feel like we fought so hard to fill these buckets, and I see it, Tanya. I'll get you next. We fought so hard to fill these buckets, and we just finally did. This is the 1 year we did. I mean, we were on zero. I think if the community knew to the degree that we were on the gas tank, I just would like to have a little more discussion about it. We're going to go back and pump on gas. Tanya?
Thank you, Councilmember Mann. I had communicated, I had read through Tim's memo, and while I reasonably believe I understand the intent, I do think a lot more discussion has to occur regarding reserves, because that was one of the first things I noticed when I came to the city, is that they weren't necessarily prioritized in terms of what is the most important reserve that you fill first, and then what is the second. Reserves should be clearly defined, and I think Tim has offered some explanation in his draft, but I think we need to have a standard definition that is the accounting definition used for reserves. And there are many other points that when I've reviewed that section of code that I would certainly be suggesting for the City Council to consider, where I have looked at other policy and drafted many policies around reserves. I think it is definitely worth a robust discussion with City Council. But the first step is, at least for me, is to really understand, and I mean 100% understanding of what is the City Council's intent and what are your priorities in terms of a contingent reserve, a revenue stabilization reserve, and then a strategic reserve. I certainly am seconding Councilmember Munn that we have more robust discussion. Typically, reserves are balanced at the end of a fiscal year based on actual fiscal impacts of what has happened. And really, they don't have anything to do with budget or budget variance. It has to do with how much revenue actually came in, how much was actually expended, and it's our net position in the general fund. So we do have some time for discussion, and so I would respectfully request that we take some time to really work through these topics with definitely a target to have something in place with an update to the code by the end of fiscal year 20, so that when we go to close this year, the accounting staff and myself, we know exactly what we need to do, and we're ready to carry out the intent of the City Council.
I think this is a really good starting point, Tim. We had to start somewhere. I know you and I have talked, council presidents have talked, other council members have talked about doing this. We need to fund the strategic reserves. We need to find a way to do that. So we have probably used up our time on this topic. How would we like to proceed further? Do you want to do a little task force on this and continue to discuss, or how would you like to go? Council President?
Yeah, this is Council President Beggs. This is just the first discussion, so it's helpful to get the feedback. I've been asking Tim to get us a draft that we could kind of dig our teeth into and find those places. I think the other thing that's driving that, and this doesn't quite get to it yet, but at least for me, is that in the past, administrations have used unfilled positions as sort of ad hoc savings accounts and then redeployed not just non-personnel, but actually personnel. So moving money from one department to another. And that's really the piece that I'm trying to get at, so that if we change priorities in the year, and this is a good year as an example of things have changed, that council is also signs off. If we take, for instance, we haven't been filling our planner positions. If it was up to me, we'd be filling our planner positions. And instead, I don't know where those savings are going to go, but if they get deployed to some other part of the government, and I think, just as one person, but if a majority of us think, no, they really need to stay in planning, that's where we need that balance between it. So I'm hoping that we'll dig in a little farther on there. And in terms of the prioritization of which reserve fund, I think we're fine. I think mainly what Tim was trying to do, at least my request, was to set up an actual structure for how do we deal with this issue that has been, just depends on the year, but there's not a lot of guidance, and there's misunderstanding and confusion and some data that's not always there. So it's just to make it more transparent. So I think this is a good step, and we can take this conversation and add some language and get closer, and then we'll come back to you maybe next month. So.
Okay, and I'm happy to work with Tim and Tanya and any other council members who are interested in this, because this is important stuff, especially when we're hit with the pandemic and we sure needed those reserves. Okay, we can move on to the next item. Everyone's okay with that? Next item is Mike Ormsby about insurance renewal.
Thank you, Councilwoman Mullin. I had to move up to Wes's office. I'm having computer problems today, so my mic down there didn't work. So I just wanted to give you a brief summary of where we are in the insurance selection process, and I think this is the third time that we've talked with you about where we are. So there are a group of us, Sally Stouffer, Robin Colcutt in accounting, Tanya Wallace, and then Scott Simmons' group has been particularly involved this time too, because the lines of business he has had a lot of changes in insurance coverages this past year. So we have had phone calls with the brokers over the last couple weeks, and we have a good idea of the recommendations that we've received from them, and I wanted to just briefly share those with you today. And it would be our hope that we would have on the advanced agenda for the 24th, next Monday, the tentative proposal, so that on August 31st, the council could approve that, and then we can go ahead and bind insurance coverage September 1st. In the past, this has been a real rush, so we appreciate this year it's been less rushed, and that we've been able to update you as we go along. So I'm going to break this into two different groups of insurance. It's kind of the way the brokers presented it to us. And I'd start out by saying that they've been telling us for about the last 4 months that we can expect between 15 and 30% rate increases depending on the line of insurance. So that wasn't a good place to start. So I'll start with the area where we've been the most successful, and this deals with what I'll just call the general insurance, kind of putting it into that bucket. And so that includes public entity liability. We had been expecting a 20% rate increase there, and it ends up being 8%. Excess workman's comp, which in the past has been a troublesome area for us on the premium side, is 5.85% is the proposed increase for next year. Then we have what's called equipment floater, and this is a policy that the brokers push real hard to get our current provider, Alliance, to limit themselves to a 5% rate increase. Then the crime policy, which has a big rate increase, but it's not a huge dollar amount premium-wise, that proposed rate increase is 18%. And then for excess liability, which is also not a huge dollar amount, but it is a big proposed increase, is 17.76%. So if you just take the total dollar premium amounts for that group of insurance, they are going up approximately 9%, 8.86%, so approximately 9%. So that is far better than we have been led to believe is possible for those policies. Then I'll switch to cyber liability, and this is only the second year that we've had cyber liability, and the premium increase there is 22%. The dollar amount itself is relatively small. It goes from about $35,000 to $42,500. Then we go to probably the biggest, most complicated part of our insurance portfolio, which Tim could tell you about, having handled this for a lot of years. And it really deals with what I'll call the utility properties and the and actually facilities. So I would start with general city property, and these premiums are going to go up about 19.5% in the aggregate. So general city property, that increased a little less than the 20%. But then we go to Upriver Dam and the waste energy plant. Those, as you can imagine, not many cities own even one of those assets, and we own two. And the brokers and actually the underwriters spent a lot of time looking at both of these projects this year. And thanks to work by Scott, and particularly on the waste energy plant, Chris Everett, they were able to explain how we do what we do, and we're able to, we still got pretty hefty premium increases, but we were able to keep the deductibles limited to amounts that were less than they started out with. So those premiums are increasing right around 20% as well. Then the next area that I would mention is just total property, and we've got equipment breakdown, and actually the premium there is going down this year by about $26,000. So the aggregate of all of those together is a little less than 20% on the rate increase side. And this is an area where the brokers were telling us a couple weeks ago this might be closer to the 30% range, and so it's at 20 or a little less than 20. I would just mention the things that they told us here, and of course they toot their horn a little bit, that because they've been our brokers for a long time, they know our story and can tell it real well, and there's some truth to that. But the second thing they told us is that the claims history that we have, and actually Tim Donovan and Nancy Isserlis and other people really implemented this far before I was here. They've noticed a decline in the number of claims being made, and the severity of the claims are reduced. And finally, they have a lot of confidence in people that are running the business side of the utilities enterprise in terms of risk management, which is really what they're trying to quantify when they do premiums. So that is a real quick and dirty of the status report of where we are today, and I'm hoping I'll be meeting telephonically with our brokers over the next week to get the final proposal together so that we have something in the advanced agenda for the council to look at next Monday. But in the meantime, be happy to answer any questions or speak to any concerns that people might have.
Hey, Mike?
Yes.
This is Councilmember Cathcart. Hey, just out of curiosity, looking through this, it looks like it's $5 million coverage for the cyber attack. Is that enough? I've read about some of these cities who've been held hostage for millions and millions of dollars. So I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Well, we talked with the brokers about it, and then they thought, given the protections that we have in place here, and again, this was new last year, so we started at 5, and I think, and I see that Eric's on the call, he may have a different view. I think the broker's view was that was probably a reasonable amount, given that we're relatively new to the market and we can develop a history, and they were relatively impressed with the steps we had in place to hold our risk down. So I'm not sure that that's a really good answer, but they recommended that amount. We had started out at $1 million, and they said, well, geez, you really ought to be higher than that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I've seen some cities that have been hit with quite a big number. So,
Anything else on insurance? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Ormsby.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I guess expected, but best we could do. All right, we'll go to the next item, and I think this is Chief Schaefer in West Prego on the ILA contract update.
Good afternoon. Just real briefly, and Chief Schaefer can fill in the details. Actually, Michael, sitting right here, might be able to help as well. I'm a little hesitant to say a lot about the where the contract is at, in that it's still a little bit wet ink-wise, and the county's still in the review phase. But looking at I think they've settled pretty well on allocation of the rental fees based on usage, and I'll tell you kind of what they're at, but they are subject to change depending on, as the attorneys work on it and get it ready for council and commissioners and boards to approve. But Shrek is at kind of 73% of the cost. County IT department 1%, our IT department about 1%, and then our fire and police together make up the remaining 25%. It's gone through, I think, everybody that's at the county right now for their final review, and then once they finish it, they'll circulate it back around, and then hopefully we're able to get that in front of council relatively soon to take care of that. And I'll hand off to Brian. If there's anything, Chief, that's missing on that?
No, sir. No, that's exactly as far as the cost share and the cost split. That's what was the last I'd seen as well.
Does this go back retroactively then?
Yes, it does. Within 30 days, so the dollars changing hands to the city is within 30 days of the approval by everybody, the city will get a check for about $250,000 that will reimburse us back to July 1st of last year. And then we will apply that formula going forward.
I want to thank all the council who backed us up on this, and we pushed for this, and I want to thank all the staff that forged forward. It was a very dicey situation, and this was in the best interest of our citizens. So in terms of the dollar amount and getting it back, not without making comment about the switchover, but definitely using city resources that we paid for. So thank everyone on that. Anyone have any comments or questions on this? Okay. Thank you. Next is, we're back to Tanya. In fact, Tanya's got a whole section here. And so we're going to start with department presentations. Looks like she's queuing it up. Thanks, Tanya.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to cue this up and we're going to get right down to it. This is the last multi-part series in our departments presenting information regarding COVID and how it has impacted their operations and their finances. So as you can see, we're going to start with IT, and then we're going to go right into HR and a little bit about how they've been impacted, and then asset management, and then we will end in fleet. I know the departments have worked really hard on these presentations. I do want to stay truthful and respectful to the agenda in 30 minutes. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to IT, Eric Finch.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you, Council. If go to the first subject slide there, past this one, please. Right, so this is kind of a summary, and I think as a backdrop to this, the IT shop has, I think, responded pretty well, and we've been able to support within the current budget framework what has been about like 45 additions that we've had to digest, since the start of COVID in terms of, facilitating remote work and remote collaboration and bringing new tools online and some additional new security tools that help, keep us still operating safely, even though we have a large percent of our, at least our administrative type personnel working from home or from an alternate location. So I think that we are actually seeing an increase in services that we've rendered over the past 6 months. We've been able to, as I said, largely digest that. We have been able to leverage, the existing budget well to do that. Some of the things that we needed to do, especially on our network side, that it had already kind of been planned in general. and through some of the issues we had with the network early on, we were able to get some good vendor participation in buying down some of the costs. So it was all able to be done within our capital, our normal capital replacement budget. We've also, I think, provided a lot of new services, as mentioned. And the one thing I would suggest as we look at this going forward is, we are simply, an enabler function for our departments. We don't necessarily have, services on our own, so to speak. So realistically, we're trying to react as best we can and remain flexible to our departments and their needs as they continue to shape and grow, both in general as well as through COVID. There's some related articles there that I thought were interesting because in many cases there's been an inverse relationship in terms of technology spending and COVID, and a lot of this is related to efficiency and the remote work piece. And I think it's a good news story that we've been able to kind of basically bring these services online within the existing budget. Pending any questions, I'll go to the next slide. So this is basically our core service model. No big surprises there. We did want to add some kind of notes to the right there in terms of the different amounts of things we have. So I think that some of those get a little bit less play. And one that isn't even listed there that probably should be is that we're probably up somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 6,000 endpoints. And these are things that basically connect to our network, and they run the gamut of things like vending machines at fire that sell commodities, to paramedics, to the ice machine at the ice ribbon is actually a network connected device because it has to be, it's computer controlled. It needs to be accessed by the vendor and as well as the park staff. So there's all those endpoints need to be secured. And it's increasingly complex the way you need to secure some of those devices that aren't the stereotypical, user computer that you have or that smartphone. So I think the rest of these I think you're familiar with. So pending any questions, I'll go to the next slide. So under COVID again, most of our staff, other than network and some of the ones that require a physical presence have been working, remote. I think that's been fairly successful. Actually, the biggest challenge as we've seen is losing of that team dynamic that really is important to some of the work groups in terms of just getting the work done. It's not necessarily required in terms of the work that they do, but it's certainly been a little bit of a challenge for them because they've had less interaction with their team members. I think that we've seen delays in some of the major, system, implementations, whether that be E-Series or the municipal court software or the utility, billing system replacement, just because of a number of factors that include, basically the vendor side in terms of them navigating, obviously a different environment for COVID. We've had to do a lot of steps. We were already in the process of looking at our network architecture for some of the challenges that were seen in February. And then obviously this just kind of took another step up as it related to supporting remote work and remote collaboration and virtual meetings like the one we're on today. So I think that's been largely successful, but we still got some work to do, and we're on budget for that. We're also seeing a growth, obviously, of remote tools. And hosted platforms, and where these in some ways can help defer some of the the on-premise servers or other equipment that you might need to have. They are a little bit increasingly expensive on the operational cost side, and there's usually some additional costs that come in terms of the cloud storage and the cloud platforms that they'll be on, and so those are things that are being woven into the current and future budgets. We're also looking, as was briefed in the urban piece earlier today, we're looking at a lot of partnerships that we're doing with our fiber infrastructure. This is both normal as well as looking at seeing how we can advance some of those initiatives, especially as it helps us better connect and have better resiliency for our increasingly internet-based systems and software. As well as being opportunistic as it relates to economic development or providing, I think, better solutions for remote learning and some of the digital divide aspects. So a few other metrics here that are just provided, just for interest. And I think pending any questions, I'll move to the next slide. So from a quarter one performance, again, it hasn't been updated since the original time we were going to brief. But we did perform 40 ad hoc projects, through a Tiger team that was set up at the beginning of COVID to help us kind of respond to the different issues that we needed, and where they had obviously some bumps, early on. I think that the success has been, I think, pretty good across the organization. Although we still, have some work to do. I think we do have, some good solutions that have been in place for the collaboration aspect, but we are looking to expand those to try to get better in terms of how do you host more virtual meetings that basically kind of need that whiteboard or that better, I think, integrated teamwork type environment. And so we're looking at Microsoft Teams that we already have under licensing to be able to extend and help in some of those areas. I think we're also looking from the budget standpoint to kind of delay some of the computer and hardware replacements, just to kind of give us some budget capacity, and those are things we're working with the finance and budget on to help have impact both this year as well as positive impact in 2021. I think we are continuing to meet all our service obligations, which I think is noteworthy with the 40 additional projects, and we continue to try to improve our services. Pending any questions, I'll move to the next slide. And so I just wanted to kind of give a highlight in terms of the budget impact piece. We have basically done about $168,000 worth of specific work that we believe is related to COVID specifically in terms of the remote workforce support. And those things we're working on with the finance team in terms of, how to budget and how to compete for those funds. A lot of the effort really, which I think approaches the 7-digit number, is all related to normal maintenance and capital improvement upgrades that were already budgeted for. So they don't have any budget impact for this year or in subsequent years. For 2021, we believe, based on where we're at in the planning process, with our departments and with finance, that we can meet the expanded service catalog, all the services that our departments are requesting and needing, and that's good news. And I think that one of the points we wanted to make sure we made is that again, we don't necessarily have, we don't do IT work necessarily just for IT. That's only, a very, very minor piece. 93% of our budget is directly related to costs and services that are provided, or contracts that we help monitor for a department, that obviously provides services to our citizens. So, ultimately, if we need to talk about further reductions, if the situation does, get a little bit more worse, then certainly that's something we would need to work with the departments, because a reduction for us really means a reduction in service, or spending on a given department or division technology need. Pending any questions, I'll move to the next slide. And that completes the IT section. Pending any questions. Thank you for the time and support.
All right, this is Megan Samuelson from Human Resources. I'm going to present on behalf of Amber Richards. We had some competing meetings this afternoon, so we are dividing and conquering. All right, so if you can go to the next slide. The core service model in Human Resources under normal operations consists of 6 service pillars that have largely been built on in-person, on-site, and mostly a paper-based delivery model. So that covers everything from the HR support to the department, labor relations, benefits, safety, workers' comp, and then those additional just core business services such as FMLA, ADA. We manage all of the PeopleSoft entries and a lot of the administrative functions. Next slide. And under a disrupted operations model, which we experienced during the COVID pandemic, there really was no reduction in our service delivery or capacity. Our delivery really evolved to include primarily virtual and electronic methods. Next slide. Response and recovery, our focus has really been on employee support and safety. So our staff members really played a significant role in emergency operations and supporting the city workforce really heavily from the months of March through May. So we have two safety members in HR. We have the safety manager and the safety coordinator. They were members on the safety officer rotation out at emergency operations. They both performed in that duty, but they also supported the day-to-day safety support throughout the city. We did provide additional city personnel to fill critical emergency operations support roles, such as in policy work and development in response to the impacts of COVID-19. The HR analyst team developed manager and employee FAQs in addition to a number of other support documents to really help them guide through supporting employees through the pandemic. We also modified our service model to really provide a 7-day per week support to all employees, management, and labor partners March through May when we were pretty much the most heavily impacted by COVID. We have actually approved to date over 15,000 hours of emergency paid sick leave in FMLA. Employees have used just about 11,000 of those hours. And that is emergency leave that was enacted as part of the Families First Coronavirus Act. So employees have been utilizing that, and we've been helping departments to manage the use of that leave. We've also supported employees in city operations in the transition to teleworking and the impacts of childcare. And one significant item of note, as we're speaking with a lot of our other counterparts in the area, we're learning that when the emergency paid sick leave in FMLA came out in, I think it was April, other organizations really encouraged their employees to utilize that, not thinking through the fact that COVID really could have long-lasting impacts throughout the rest of this year. Whereas the city's approach was supporting the employees and preserving as many of those hours as possible through modifying their work schedules and finding other alternative means for them to continue performing their city duties while also tending to the needs of the home with kids out of school and out of daycare. And because of that, the majority of our employees actually have most of their 480 hours of FMLA still eligible to use, which means now that they're really getting hit hard with distance learning in the fall, if they really are having difficulties managing the work-life balance, supporting their employees, they do have that leave still available. So I think that really is a testament to the collaboration between employees and management throughout the city to do all that we could to make resources available, turning up all of that additional leave for them. We've also negotiated various MOUs with our labor partners that allows the city to modify a number of our operations in order to respond to COVID-19. We've also mitigated significant risk through proactive policy development and employee support efforts. Next slide. Now that we're kind of through the heaviest part of COVID, our attention is really turned toward preparing for the Phase 3 reopening of City Hall and bringing a lot of those employees that have been in a teleworking status back into their roles within the city in some capacity, while also supporting the distance learning needs of a lot of employees. We're also managing the positive COVID-19 cases within our employee population. One thing that we put into place, we did contract with on-call cleaning and sanitization for all infected work sites. And to date, we've only had 15 employees test positive for COVID that have reported it, which I think is really a testament to the fact that the safety protocol we have in place is really working. And when we do have these positive cases, it's not spreading to their coworkers or other employees throughout the city. We've also gone 2 weeks now without a positive COVID case in the city. So things are looking up. We really didn't have positive cases until I think about June or July, we experienced our first case. So it was really a delayed impact to the city. We've also provided no-cost COVID testing available to all employees and dependents on their medical plans, and we are going to cover those costs through the end of this year. We've worked hard with Marlene Feist to get regular communication out to employees, and part of that communication has been a focus on stress management and just the mental well-being of our employees through various EAP resources. Our EAP provider has really stepped up and gone above and beyond to provide a lot of new resources to the city that we've really been pushing employees to engage in. All right, next slide. So some of the silver linings we've experienced, we've evolved a lot, if not most all of our processes to virtual. So our new employee orientation has been conducted virtually the last two months that we held it. So we're running it through WebEx. There's about 30 attendees on those. It's gone pretty smoothly so far. We've also evolved most of our other meetings, such as labor management and interviews, into that virtual format as well. Our clerks, because they've had some downtime with the teleworking capacity, they haven't had those interruptions that they experience in the office. They've had the opportunity to convert most all of our documents into an electronic format. So now employees and administration can access really important documents at any time of day from home, remotely. We can email them. It's really increased the efficiency there. We have transitioned to digital signatures, which again has allowed for a lot less disruption in waiting for multiple parties to sign documents. And as I mentioned previously, teleworking for most all the HR staff, it really has increased capacity during this time just from the reduced disruptions within the office. So we are going to continue maintaining a lot of these process improvements. The electronic documents, it's really as a whole been a big improvement to how we're providing our services for the city. So before I turn it over to Matt Lowmaster for performance measures, are there any questions on the HR presentation? All right, Matt,
I have a quick question. This is Karen Stratton. About how many employees have we hired in the last few months throughout this? Because you said you were doing new employee
orientation.
Right. So I'm just curious, how many have we hired in the last 4 or 5 months?
I don't have that number at the top of my head, but I will get that for you, and I can email that to council.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yep. All right, Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you for performance measures.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we're going to go over all the injuries that we've had in Q1 and Q2. So next slide, please. So these are recordable cases. So recordable cases are cases that require more care than first aid. So in Q1, we had 34 recordable cases, and 4 of those were COVID-related cases. As well as in Q2, we had 12 related COVID cases and then 22 cases of our normal type injuries, sprains and strains that required further care than just basic first aid. Next slide, please. So our incidents are high in Q1. Out of the 113 incidences, 76 were COVID-related and 37 were related to on-the-job type injuries. In Q2, 67 of the incidences were COVID-related and 30 of those cases were on-the-job type injuries. Next slide, please. The lost time cases are cases where the employee cannot come back to work. So for Q1, out of the 42, 24 of those cases were COVID-related. So that was they went in for diagnostic testing for COVID, and the doctor put them on quarantine until the test results came back, which ranged anywhere from 5 to 14 days. And the same in Q2, out of those 38, 23 were also COVID-related. Next slide, please. And for medical cases, those were all on-the-job injuries with 0 COVID-related cases. Does anybody have any questions? All right, thank you.
Just a comment, it looks like injuries are down and the rest were COVID-related.
Yes, the injuries are down, but we also, this can be deceiving due to we don't have as many temp seasonal employees that we typically would have, and a lot of staff are working outside the city, which attributes to our less cases.
Thank you.
Great. This is Dave Steele, Asset Management. So asset management, as you all are pretty familiar with it, is responsible for the real estate facilities for all the city departments. We have about 130 structures, roughly 1,450 parcels that the city owns. That includes parks. They're by far the largest property owner in town here. So this includes acquisition, disposition, leasing of real property, development of property and facilities, planning for those, developments, things like that. The maintenance of facilities citywide, preventative maintenance, emergency maintenance, and custodial care. Next slide, please. For asset management, honestly, COVID, the service model has changed very little. Our guys are nuts and bolts guys. They're on the ground. So property and property rights acquisitions for engineering projects, they still need to happen. We do all that pretty much electronically anyway, so this hasn't really shifted things. Property leases are very similar. Project development, such as the downtown precinct, we still had to get it done. We just, had to take a little more caution whenever we were doing site visits, things like that. And then the ongoing maintenance of city facilities, still, it's got to occur. You've got HVAC systems, you've got pumps, boilers, we got roof replacements. All these kind of things have been going on. So the guys have just had to be very cognizant of their surroundings and being cautious with their cleanliness, sanitization things. As you can expect, custodial service has been hit probably the most significantly for facilities where people are still in them because of the sanitization needs that, way outstrip what asset management could do. And as Megan mentioned, we have a sanitization contract that we've been working with them to manage. So in the event of a case that we find, we reach out to those folks and they respond very promptly to get in and provide a full cleaning of the space. So next slide. We've had to incorporate social distancing, PPE and sanitization into our mission without stalling out the provision of services. When your guys are focused on repairing, a chiller or something like that, being aware of who else has been in the room, things like that, trying to maintain distance and masks and, protocols is, it slowed us down in the beginning because nobody was quite sure how this thing was going to play out, what it really meant to be exposed. But they've become more comfortable and we've gotten better at it. Facilities such as the intermodal are a great example of the flip side of our program that is under pressure. We've got tenants there that these are general. One's a restaurant, and so they took an immediate hit. And so we've got tenants there that are under pressure. Amtrak, Greyhound, and so they definitely then turned around and asked us for some assistance in the relief. What we're doing is we're working with those folks to basically capture the rent without adjusting the term of the lease, but that way we are made whole, but they are not severely pressed while they don't have the revenues coming in. What we have seen is significant delays in manufacturing and the availability of equipment and parts. Just like toilet paper disappeared, so did some of the parts that we need that come from portions of the country that are, significantly hit. And then I already mentioned the sanitization contracts with purchasing and then with HR that have allowed us to continue with our custodial services, but then we bring in sanitization, like for the courts down in the council chamber and things like that. So next slide, please. Opening the facilities up in phase 3, that's going to put, kind of additional stress on the staff to maintain the sanitization levels and to keep in front of the personal protection equipment. We've been working throughout City Hall and the other places that we're constantly in to install sneeze guards, sanitization stations. You've seen them around City Hall in the elevator lobbies. We've got disposable masks, things like that. And then we have on order. They're currently in ship it transition. Is high-efficiency UV filters to eliminate viral contamination in City Hall. What we found was trying to go to HEPA filters was kind of pretty excessive pricing compared to just a straight UV system that is installed in line in the current duct systems. It's actually fairly cost efficient, but it will provide a level of comfort as far as knowing that we're not just, if we do have a case or we do have a viral load inside City Hall, we're not just moving it around through the air system. So, next slide, please. Silver linings, like I mentioned, we provide a lot of nuts and bolt services that require people, hands, wrenches, and equipment. So COVID hasn't created a lot of opportunities for us there, but what it has helped us continue to transition over to electronic service requests, electronic signatures, getting the folks more comfortable with electronic contracts. So that continues to allow us to provide those kind of services as we move out of COVID. There's no reason to go backwards on in those kind of areas. Next slide. All right. Any questions? Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee members. This is David Payne down at Fleet Services. The reality of it is that Fleet Services didn't skip a heartbeat during this. We have to keep the wheels on the bus moving. So, our mission to establish a efficient and effective delivery of city services by providing customer departments with safe and reliable and economic, environmental, sound transportation just kept going on. Next slide, please. We did make the decision, and I made a mistake on this, with 2 administrative permanent positions, the fleet specialist and the fleet program and warranty. Fleet warranty and program specialist. We made the decision to have them work from home. We also had our project employee, Nathan Grohl, who's working at basically a fleet analyst, work from home as well. We did migrate a little bit and have the admin staff come in for 2-day a week, alternating Monday and Wednesday for one, Thursday and Friday for the other. When the number of cases started to spike again, we took that back to a minimal on an as-needed basis. The maintenance and parts department staff, they work without modifications to shifts. I think we only modified 1 person's shift. We embraced social distancing, face mask covering, sanitization efforts. We luckily had, luckily is not the right word. We were fortunate to have a light duty person who was able to accommodate, go around 3 times a day and wave down all the doorknobs and entering the facility and all the areas that we access. Next slide, please. Impacts, a little no impact in performing our mission. We actually saw an increase in efficiencies during the beginning of the COVID constraints because our vehicles weren't moving around as much as they typically do. We had greater access to them. We're going to be budget neutral for 2020. The impact to our spare parts was minimal at best, and there was nothing in that arena that actually slowed down our ability to move vehicles efficiently through the repair process. We did have 2 contact cases at the time this presentation was put forth. I think we now have potential third. We're still evaluating. Again, no negative impacts to the market. Next slide, please. Again, budget favorable for 2020. Staffing 94%, highest in the last 2 years. We've increased our planned work order metric by 2.7%. We've increased our PM compliance by 10%, and we've decreased average downtime by 12.7%. Next slide, please. For the remainder of 2020, social distancing, obviously, wearing of masks, obviously, continuing our sanitation efforts, medical awareness, and the camaraderie within the department to keep one another safe are our weapons against the virus. So, what you see here is just a reiteration of what I've already said. The staff remains vigilant and dedicated to quality service to our customers. Risk to exposures via customer and professional vehicles is our greatest concern, but we see no further obstacles in completing our mission of services. Next slide, please. Done.
Okay, City Council, that concludes the series of departmental impacts. We do hope that you have found this, I feel like a TV commercial here. We hope that you have found this useful and insightful into what all of our various services and departments have been going through over these last several months. It has, in just my observations with staff, it has been a very intense and somewhat emotional time for everybody in terms of just being safe and performing their jobs. And all of you have also probably experienced just learning how to do meetings by WebEx has been a huge learning curve. So we've had to learn how to operate a little differently and get through our day-to-day operations and provide these vital services to our citizens, all at the same time being an example to our citizens of how to go through this pandemic together, this 100-year event together. So I hope you find it useful and insightful into operationally what has been going on. And then we've been trying to keep you up to date with the finances, and we're going to continue to do that even through this year. So here are some links for you. Are there any questions, City Council members?
I'm not seeing any right now. I do have quite a bit to go through. Does anyone have anything? Okay, we're just going to keep on rolling. It's a big day, Tanya, so let's just keep moving.
Okay, we're going to keep going. I'm going to share the next presentation here. As soon as I can. Oops. Okay, I'm going to go. Can everybody see that okay?
I'm not seeing it.
Okay. Okay, hold on 1 second.
We did get some in advance.
Share.
We're on the SIP.
Okay, can everybody see this okay?
Now we can. Yes, Tanya, go ahead.
Okay. Display settings. Okay. Very quickly, we got 4 special reports for you: the public safety SIP loan refinancing options, and a COVID-19 cost update for the city. Then we're going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing with the 2020 cost containment, tracking and reporting for you. And then just very briefly, general fund reserve status. So I'm going to go right into the public safety SIP loans. From our last session, we did have a list of proposals. The question, however, in front of you today is, and we can talk more about all of the proposals. The question in front of you today is really which financing option you would like us to proceed with. So that is what we're going to focus on today. It is really refinancing the $19 million that is currently outstanding for our public safety SIP loans. There are 3 options. There's option 1, which is just a straight refinancing option. Option 2 is where we front-loaded the financing. So we're going to take all the savings up front. And then option 3 is what we, after going back and really diving into the whole program and what fire and police need in terms of equipment and looking at that update, we then came back with you in July of a different option entirely. So these are the 3 different options, and you can see there's a lot of different variations here, but you can see the true cost, average life. This is probably one of the biggest difference for you. You can see in option 3, we extended it out. And that is because in options 1 and 2, we're maintaining the original term of the 6 different loans, whereas in option 3, we're bundling all 6 loans and amortizing over a 15-year period. The savings in dollars, you can see net present value savings, and I want to point this out. Very, almost identical, within dollars of each other. Option 3 does have the most, but again, these are just dollars. Not hundreds of dollars, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, in terms of savings in real dollars, you can see the option 1 and option 2 are nearly the same. There is a small cost with option 3. But what I would contend in option 3 is that part of the proposal was that option 3 got us out of the SIP borrowing altogether. By getting out of the SIP borrowing, except for in emergencies or rare cases, we would actually be saving hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of the program. And then general fund savings. Here's how much general fund savings would be delivered in 2020 under the different scenarios. So City Council, you do have 3 different options in front of you. There are pros and cons with all 3. So you do have a weighting decision, obviously, with a lot of different things to think about. This is just a debt service chart, and this is part of the reason for the difference in, here's 2020, the first year. This is where the 4.8 million comes about, or the other amounts as you look between option 1 and option 2. And here is what the annual debt service actually looks like under these different options, which is how we come up with the savings for the general fund. And also in option 3, you will see this is how we get out of the borrowing practice that we've gotten into. Here's what the debt service looks like otherwise. Here's the current debt service. And you might recall, City Council, that what we are transferring over is 5.8 million. And you can see, like, next year, without a refinancing, or option 2 where it's front-loaded, it's at 5.3 million. That leaves $500,000 to cash fund equipment purchases. So you can see what has happened with the debt service and the SIP program otherwise. Again, just savings, that's just the difference between the current debt service and what the optional debt service would bring and how much is saved in each of those years. Of course, in option 1 and 2, we're not imagining that we continue financing, but we know in option 1 and 2 we would have to continue to do that because $500,000 will not buy the type of equipment that the police and the fire need. So, in short, we are requesting approval of some preferred financing option. You have a lot of things to think about, City Council, and we would request your decision at least by August 31st at the Public Safety Committee meeting so that we can prepare the documentation. I'm going to pause right there and see if there are any questions.
Hey, Tanya?
Yes.
Councilmember Cathcart, is it your recommendation then that we do option 3?
Councilmember Cathcart, that would be my recommendation based on all of the information and data that I have reviewed. I do believe that that would be the best option for the city. It would get us out of It would get us out of borrowing on a continuous basis so that cycle ends. And it would also address the immediate issue that we have with the general fund in 2020. Certainly going forward, as the economy improves, because I know that it's going to improve, we can certainly be revisiting and have the opportunity to always pay this debt off even sooner if we would like to at any time in the future. So that full flexibility is there. But right now go ahead.
Sorry, you said there are pros and cons of all three. What would be the reason why we might consider one of the alternatives to number 3?
Probably the biggest reason, like looking at option 1 or option 2, is either the net present value is identical. In my prior position, many, almost 2 decades ago, net present value was really the weighting criteria that was ever used. But City Council might be interested in these savings right here, these savings in dollars.
Okay.
But really looking at the general fund is just something else that needs to be considered. So because of what it's, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just big picture, option 3 really kind of changes the model and gets us out of the cycle of borrowing. Is that your contention?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Tanya, this is Candace. I don't know if this is something for Brian Schaefer, who I think might be on the call, or maybe Tim. You've got some history on this, but hearing that we only have $500,000 available for purchases, I thought we had built some money up and had quite a bit more to spend on vehicles. Tim or somebody else, do you want to respond?
Councilmember, this is Tim Donovan. Yeah, the way the model is set right now, we've been putting more money away than we needed for debt service. So I don't think it's accurate to say that we only have $500,000 to spend on capital in 2021 if we, at the way we're doing things now. The way the model is set up, including the $5 million in debt service, there was enough to spend about $4 million next year on capital expenses. So I'm not sure how we can say there's only $500,000. I mean, if you're just looking at the amount going in on any given year, sure, but we know there's several $million sitting there, and it was set up that way on purpose. We planned for it and staggered it that way so that as the debt service grew to up to $5 million, we would then use some of that money that had been building up over time to still have money to make purchases. So I'm not sure how we come up with only having $500,000 to spend next year. And while I think it's great that we're getting out of the debt model, the debt model was put in place because we had no model previously. We were spending nothing for all intents and purposes on fire and police capital. So while I totally agree with getting out of the debt model, and that's what we were going to be doing, and have no debt left by 2029, I don't want to. I think what we have right now was there for a reason, and it served its purpose.
So I just got more information on here too. I have to say, just on first blush, I'm a little uncomfortable making that commitment for that term. But we can discuss, and I am interested in getting us out of it. So go, Tanya.
I did want to clarify, yes, that the $500,000 was really just the difference between what is going in and what the current debt service is. There is, at the end of 2019, about $2.9 million of unused funding. In option 3, it would be proposed that in order to keep fire and police on cue with their equipment plan, we would be using that plus a much smaller transfer in, and then police and fire continue uninterrupted with their plan.
Councilor Pinheiro, do you want to weigh in on this? I know we could probably take half hour on this stuff. This is big stuff.
Well, we know that there's a backlog of police vehicles that need to be purchased. So I'm wondering if we don't use SIP loan money, what are we going to use to purchase what is needed? Same thing with fire. So there are still vehicles that they're not going to keep on forever. So what are we using in place of SIP loan funds?
Councilmember Kinnear, that is an excellent point, and we certainly recognize that there is a funding deficit per se to make police and fire completely whole on their equipment needs. But I would say at this point that is a separate and a very, very worthwhile discussion to have, separate from deciding on which option, financing option we want to take regarding this program. But it is definitely a very worthwhile conversation, and it is a critical issue of fire and police going forward.
I see Chief Schaefer signed on here. Chief, you want to weigh in?
Well, I was also probably surprised, like Tanya was when she first looked at the books and she shared the same information with you that she shared with us. And I think the overall philosophy that we have is we don't spend money that we don't have, and that really careful line that we walk between debt service or bringing the city into a debt situation is.
Mm-hmm.
Can you?
Mm. Is anybody here?
No.
We lost you there. Brian. Can you summarize?
No, I guess I apologize. I'm mobile, and my only recommendation is to really dig into the dollars that we're going into debt for, and then make the decision based on the long-term viability of the city in such unprecedented times. We are hurting with our capital program, especially for PPE and apparatus, self-contained breathing apparatus, things like that. But like we have before, we'll make it through. And I think what Tanya's done is very good. She wants to keep it as conservative as we can. But we simply do not, the fire department at least, does not have any capital in our budget. So if we don't have the SIP program, we do not have a funding mechanism for capital. And I'll just go back to mute and just, I appreciate that. I appreciate the way that Tanya's laid this out, and I think it's extremely valuable for us as a community to look at this in the future, how we want to fund public safety capital.
So good discussion. We've blown through the 5 minutes on this. I'd like to put this on public safety, and if there needs to be sidebars, Councilmember Kinnear, how does that sound? I will assume that's okay.
Councilmember Munn?
Yes.
For Tanya, Councilmember Wilkerson here. Are you expecting the cost of money to change significantly between now and the 1st with this 2-week window? Are you doing some type of quick constraint on that? You're muted.
In 2020, the longer the decision, the less savings we're going to have for 2020. Did I answer the question?
Yes, I thought there was some additional savings, but I thought you were looking at the cost of money between now and the end of the month.
Talking about the interest rate.
Oh, I apologize. If you're talking about the change in the interest rate, yes, interest rates have dropped just a little bit since we did the other refinancing option, so we're actually in a better position right now than we were just a few weeks ago in July.
Thank you.
Yes.
Tanya, Brian here. If we go to the current plan, which is pay off the debt in 5.5 years, how much money will we then have each year for capital expenditures?
Council President, if the debt is fully paid off within 5.5 years, then we would have 5.8 plus what was also proposed was that 5.8 grow annually based on the construction cost index.
Okay.
So we could be between 5.8 and 6.1 million. And that's though just to keep up with the cost of the equipment rising. It does not necessarily fund additional equipment needs. And I think that is to Councilmember Kinnear's discussion of how do we start to close that gap. And that is where I say I think that is another conversation, a very important conversation that we need to have.
And what's if we kept dedicating the 1% property tax increase each year, like we have been towards that, what's that roughly each year that would add on to that 5.8 to 6.1 million?
It's approximately 459, about 900,000 a year.
Okay. And then that's cumulative, right? It's 900,000 the first year and then 1.8 the second year because it rises on top of each other?
It does keep accumulating. But Council President Beggs, I also think that goes to the discussion of how do we start to close the gap? Because maybe the gap isn't that big, maybe it is.
I guess.
But I think starting that discussion of what is the gap and how do we fund it is definitely the next direction for us to go.
I guess I'm just suggesting for everyone that we could continue the path we were on, which is raising it 900,000 a year, and then once we get to that point, we'd be debt free at some point, and then we could stop raising it, and we'd be stabilized and not have to deal with debt for the next 15 years. So I'm just throwing that out for, not to argue with you, but just throwing it out for people to think about.
So you suggested that we come back at public safety meetings to discuss this, Tanya, is that correct?
Yes, a public safety meeting for a final decision so that we can begin to prepare the documentation according to your decision.
Okay, so folks, please reach out and get your questions answered in the meantime, and we can finalize where we're at the public safety meeting. And I'm going to keep us on task. Tanya, we need to cut these 5-minute intervals down to 3 because we still have 40 minutes left in this meeting. We're going to be fried because we've got to go right into a double briefing. So if you can flip along, we'll keep going.
We'll go very quickly.
Thank you.
So Tyler, let's just change presentations here.
All right, Council, can you hear me?
Yes. Did we lose him, Tanya? Maybe I'm the only one that doesn't have audio. Okay, Tanya, you need to unmute and/or Tyler because we're not hearing anything.
Okay. Tyler,
Council, can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, my apologies for that. I know we're trying to cook along here. All right, so I'm going to sit in for Sally Stouffer today. I'm a poor substitute, but I'll try to cook through this. Today we're going to discuss program offerings, the city's community response, and city cost and dollar breakdown. So the last time the finance team presented to the council, we presented two main takeaways. We knew that we had approximately $2.9 million in available dollars that we could lever as a local stimulus to our local community, and that the time frame to expend those funds was under considerable stress. So a month later, as we present today, we are grateful for the ability to announce that 6 contracts have been awarded in various community-centric sectors, allocated on the chart to the left of the screen, and that there is consideration of a second round of RFPs on or about August 23rd. So in addition to the economic aid, the city, as we all know, has participated in a number of healthy shelter and incident management operations to protect the health and safety and the welfare of at-risk populations. Various funding mechanisms have been utilized to make these initiatives possible. I know that some of these actions that we've taken, specifically at Mission and the arena, were predicated on the idea that CARES funds would be absorbing some of those costs, and I will come back to those on the final slide. So the last time that we presented to you, we noted that we are using a decision tree to determine fund eligibility. The first check is against FEMA. If the expense doesn't qualify, we look to COVID relief, and any item that qualifies for both goes under FEMA. We also frequently encounter items that don't qualify for either. The importance of presenting this is that while the eligibility can go from FEMA to COVID, it can't go the other way around. Do you have any questions, Council? Okay, moving on.
Keep going.
Perfect. Okay, so I wanted to kind of present a breakdown that might explain this in a little bit better terms. So I'm going to break this down into 3 categories: goods and services, wages and salary, and then the emergency leave. So in the first goods and services, looking at line 1, as of July, we spent approximately $424,000, and we estimate a further $343,000 equal to that $767,000. If you look at line 2, over the same time period, we have approximately $85,989 in CARES eligible goods and service expenditures. Looking at line 3, we also estimate that we'll incur another $47,300 in goods and service CARES eligible costs. That leaves us with $633,590 in the gross eligibility for FEMA. If you look at line 4, FEMA will pay 75% or $475,000. The other $25,000, which is $158.3, is CARES eligible. That's the match that the city would put up. So second category, if you look at line 6, as of July, we spent approximately $574,000. During ramp-up and emergency redeployment of personnel, we incurred significant costs, which are mostly only CARES eligible. These activities have since ended, and associated costs have almost completely stopped. We estimate a further $102.5 in overtime, which will be FEMA eligible. Looking at line 7, as of July, we have 308 in eligible FEMA emergency overtime. As I mentioned, we anticipate an additional 102.5. We have 268,000 in CARES eligible redeployment of personnel. These are budgeted employees who haven't been filling their intended roles, but they are budgeted. Looking at line 8, we're back to FEMA paying 75% of the 408 claim, equal to $306,000, with the other 102 being CARES eligible. Looking at line 9, we have total CARES eligibility of $370,000. Final category here. Looking at line 10, as of July, we have $429,000 in costs in the category of emergency leave, and we expect to incur about another $240 by the time the CARES window closes in October. This is 100% CARES eligible, but not FEMA. And so if I can pull your attention to the right-hand side of the screen, then I can sum this up. Right now, we're looking at $6,660,000 that were spent, 2.9 that were distributed, with 3.7 million left. we have $1.3 million as being CARES eligible. We have a small built-in contingency for capacity in reaching that phase 3 and implementing technological solutions to bring people back in while adhering to social distancing and some of those other constraints. And then beyond that, we have some sheltering actually encumbered. I have not had the opportunity to confirm this with a member of the grants management or contracts team, so I was able to find $526 spent and encumbered myself. So should the council choose to bill CARES eligible charges as detailed here, then a further $1.1 million should be available for additional program and community response. And if the council elects to forego some of the CARES eligibility reimbursement, then it should be noted that County Monitors will receive the next appropriate recourse. Is there any questions, council?
I have a question.
That's it.
I have a question
That's all I
on
got.
the emergency leave. I'm not clear what is that? Those are city employees on
So
leave?
this is the leave that Human Resources mentioned in their presentation.
And we were required to provide it by.
Right.
Oh, they can hear me, huh? You can all hear me. That was part of the CARES Act that we were, the CARES Act or the Families First Act, I apologize that I'm not recalling right off the top of my head, that we were required to provide up to 2 additional weeks of leave time when it was related to COVID. And there were certain criteria that the federal government had outlined. So this was an additional leave cost that we were mandated to respond to.
But we're mandated as an employer, not because we're providing services, though. I'm just understanding it.
That is correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, let's keep rolling.
That's it. I thank you for the opportunity, and you guys have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Tyler.
Okay, so of course it's not advancing. There we go. So cost containment. Moving on to cost containment. Yep. It's not letting me, so. Okay, so you're going to see what you see up there in essence of time. So we started the cost containment effort back in April with monthly financial updates and projected revenues. We started, the departments all submitted their proposals. We reviewed them in May. We gave all of you, City Council, a very detailed package in June. And then we reviewed some of those details in July. So what we've done in August to, again, start moving these cost containment or this budget authority, we needed to really start moving it. So we created a reserve code within each fund for all departments, and then we've started to transfer that budget into this parking lot. And that way we can administratively start to track the authority and compare it against the revenue that is actually coming in to make sure that we're going to fund what we can fund. We plan on continuing to report to you how these amounts as we start to transfer the funding in. Our target is nearly $8 million, and that's on the next slide, you might recall. And then we're going to start to report this to you on a monthly basis. So where did that money come from? This is from the last report last month where we showed you as of the June 2020 workshop or monthly report, we were estimating about an $18.6 million overall deficit position. This was just the loss and the use of reserves that we would require at that time. And then here's cost containment efforts and how that report categorized, coming up with roughly $8 million that we were suggesting for cost containment efforts. Again, the proposed public safety financing, we know that that is still an outstanding issue. It could or could not, but it would decrease the amount of reserves that we would need to use. Any questions there, Council? And Paul's going to highlight some of that in the monthly report as well, where you can find that. But this was just a way that we could start moving those cost containment efforts into a parking lot, and from an administrative perspective that we can start to track it and try to target an accumulation of about $8 million worth of identified budgetary savings. Moving into general reserves, and then we're going to wrap up here. You do have 2 revenue stabilization reserves, a contingency reserve, and we've talked about that earlier. And then you have the rest of your unappropriated fund balance. I've shown you here the current balance of each, and then you see projected shortfalls, certainly the revenue stabilization. How this reserve can be used per code, it's really to mitigate material revenue shortfalls that persist through the year. That is where we're at right now. We are having a revenue issue, but we're also having a cost issue when it comes to our response. And so in the contingency reserve, how that can be used is to meet extraordinary expenditures. Usually these are for emergency events, unforeseen, unavoidable, that threaten the health and safety of our citizens, or another unanticipated one-time expense, usually from an unfunded mandate. The example that we've used today is the additional 2 weeks of leave costs that we would incur from a federal mandate. The state also hands down mandates. Sometimes those are unanticipated. Or to fund significant operating efficiencies that will result in future cost savings. I would assume that in order for them to be used for that purpose, that you would have a special report demonstrating future cost savings before you would approve the use of a contingency reserve in that manner. And then you have the rest of it, the unappropriated fund balance, which is your most flexible reserve amount. So here's kind of where we're sitting at right now, and I know this is small, and I hope you look at your package in some more detail. But under revenue stabilization, there's a $7.2 million balance. The revenue loss that we are estimating, again, based on that June report, is about $14.2 million. That would wipe out this reserve in its entirety and actually leave it in a deficit position, which the deficit position would just be resolved by transferring from the unappropriated reserve to resolve that. However, the public safety SIP savings could reasonably help offset that, as well as the cost containment. Those 2 efforts are the reason that we're going through those exercises, is to help preserve as much of the revenue reserve as possible, or to use as little of that reserve as possible to offset for the revenue losses we're incurring. Now, the contingency reserve, in the first quarter, there were some dollars allocated for emergency shelter services. This use fits perfectly within the codified uses for this reserve, so we reduce that balance slightly. Now, some of the other items that have occurred, the permanent housing projects, the scraps contract increase, emergency management, adding of a staff, those are from the unappropriated reserve, as they don't really meet the criteria for the other 2 reserves. So that would bring down the balance. Some still outstanding items are labor agreements that may be in excess of the budget, efficiency investments. Some of the efficiency investments could also come from contingency reserve, again, if they meet that criteria of showing long-term savings, or other future funding gaps. But those are all for you to decide. This is simply a hypothetical situation intended just to demonstrate the impact of some of the efforts and some of those opportunities that will be coming in front of you, City Council. The public safety SIP loan, if we're successful with most of our cost containment measures, you can see what happens here, that we actually preserve some of our revenue stabilization, which may be very important as we go into 2021. Contingency reserves. COVID-19 response costs, and this is just a hypothetical number, but if those are not offset with other sources, then they would likely come from the contingency reserve, because COVID response does meet that emergency for health and safety of our citizens. It does meet that criteria. So it would bring that reserve balance down to that level. Oops, I apologize. Zipping along here. Down in the unappropriated, you can see labor agreements. Hypothetical. I know that we have not negotiated anything. I'm just to demonstrate. There could also be efficiency investments. Nothing on the horizon, just showing that this is certainly the time to start investing one-time dollars, though, in order to structurally rebalance ourselves going forward. And then any other future funding gaps that may come forward. So you can see what that would do. It would leave this ending balance of about 3.5 and take us from a total of 47 million down to 25. Again, this is hypothetical. I keep saying that, but I just want to stress that point. So in a quick wrap-up, we've shown you the public safety SIP refinancing. We know we're pending your affirmative direction there. COVID cost update. I think we've had a more positive outcome on that, and you have a little bit better understanding of how the funding can be split between FEMA, COVID, and or reserves. We've also talked to you a little bit about 2020 and how we are moving items into a parking lot so we can better track and control these budgetary authorities for you. And then we've just highlighted a little bit of the general fund reserves and the status where we think those might be and what you can anticipate going forward.
Tanya,
And that,
thank you.
yes.
Great summary. When you're talking about these changes to general fund balances, this is to access them in 2020. This is not for 2021. So we would be going into 2021 with half the reserve, and we may need those, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Other questions? Okay. Wish it was better news, but thank you. Why we get paid the big bucks. We still need to hear from Paul, and I have a hard out at 3:15. We'll switch over, so you can fill the time. Go, Paul.
Good afternoon, Council. We'll get through these as fast as I can. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, so the first report, these were sent out by Laura, I believe, a week or two ago. This first one, these are the intra-fund budget transfers. So these are the ones that go from, they might cross type codes if they go from a capital to supplies, or if they go from salary and benefits to a different type code, they would end up on this report. And these are all the ones for July of 2020, and it kind of goes across a couple different departments. Most of them are pretty standard. You see progressive promotions or position changes and that type of thing. So it's really, I don't think there's anything out of the ordinary for this one. If there's any questions, I'm happy to field them. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next one.
Keep going.
Okay. The second report that Laura sent out, this is dealing with just the general fund. So these are all changes increasing or decreasing the general fund. We had 0 changes in the second quarter. We've had 1 so far in the third quarter, and that was back on July 1st, where police had a contract with STA to provide additional law enforcement presence on buses. So we actually brought in about $76,000 in revenue, and there was $76,000 in likewise expenditures. So it was a net 0 change to the general fund, but since this was an SBO, it shows up on this report as well. Any questions on this report? Okay. So I'll move over to our monthly general fund financial summary document. This is what Tanya had some of the snips in her presentation. The highlighted areas are the ones that have changed from the prior month. So on the revenue side, this just shows and books that $76,000 in additional revenue. and you can see the matching on the 76,000 for expenses. And then we just updated the title categories on the general fund expense side, and these tie to the cost containment exercise that Tanya also just went over. So we have salary savings from vacancies, about 4.8 million on that type, and about 3.1 million in expense control. And as Tanya mentioned, we're taking budget transfers from departments and moving it out of their, basically out of the budget authority they have and they can access, and putting it into a special reserve line within that department. So it provides us some flexibility so we don't have to keep going back for SBOs in case things actually improve the rest of the year, but it walls it off from departments being able to access those funds. And we have some other safeguards in place where we have to get city administrator and CFO approval before they can access those funds, and we'll report all that back to you as well for City Council. Any questions on this one? Okay. And on the second page of that document, we update monthly on the big three, our sales, property, and utility taxes. It's updated through May for this because we have the 2-month lag for sales tax. So you can see we were pretty far short for what we were expecting to receive for those three revenue types in the general fund. And then we show salary, wages, and benefits on the expenditure side. Since about 90% of the general fund expenditures are for people, we have been pretty much below budget through the year. July had 3 pay periods, so that's why it's a little bit of a spike above the prior months, but we're still tracking below budget for salary, wages, and benefits. And then we typically show the reserve account balances on this report as well. So I will switch over to my last couple of slides to wrap it up. Yep, so the highlights, again in quotation marks, because again, not very good news. General fund revenues are down across the board about 5.4%. We picked up some property tax revenue in July, but we're still down approximately $1 million there, or 3.8%. General fund expenditures also below budget through July. We're about 5% below, with salaries and benefits approximately $2.1 million below where we expected them to be. For uniform OT, through July, police and fire had spent approximately 68% and 81% of their respective annual overtime budgets. A quick chart to show the revenue for general fund. Again, $5.2 million below where we expected it to be. We're down about 3% if you compare it to year-to-date 2019. And we still have those extension of the property tax payments and then the sales tax payments. But you do see a little bit of an increase from June and July over what we were anticipating. And a quick budget update for the last little bullet. The draft 2021-2026 CIP, we're anticipating delivering that Tuesday, September 1st. From there, it'll go to the Plan Commission for their consistency review workshop on Wednesday, September 9th. Work continues on the mayor's 2021 proposed budget. The departments are currently working on their line item files, and finance has set up weekly meetings with city council budget staff to trade ideas, make sure we're all on the same page as we work through the process. So that is it for me.
Paul, we should be getting the last part of those property tax payments, though, this month, right? I mean, this is it. There's no more delays.
I believe, I'd have to check on that. Yeah, I'm not sure. We're pretty much caught up overall, but I know there's still a little bit of a lag out there for us.
I think they did a second deferral, so
Right.
I'm hoping we might have some bright news there. So
Yeah.
great. Thank you. Thank you, Tanya and team. If there's nothing else to come before us, we will sign off so we can switch over for 3:30. Thank you for getting it all in. Appreciate it. Bye-bye. See you soon.